So there's been a lot of questions. People are always asking. We see different things. We're unsure. Should we be foliar feeding alfalfa? Should we not be? Folks, I raised some alfalfa. I'm gonna tell everybody that's on here. We have two different groups that join this call. So I work for a company at Land O'Lakes. The agronomy division is called Winfield. I'm a cropland alfalfa and forage specialist for our team on the seed side. So I have a bunch of Winfield people and cropland people on here. And I also invited my Facebook group, which would be the alfalfa fans only people. So there's two different groups kind of merged in here on this call today. So I wanted everybody to be aware of that. We're going to have some Winfield people, some co-op retail sellers in here. We're going to have some independent people that might not do any business with us on the Winfield side, but are also alfalfa growers. So I wanted everybody to just understand what this crowd looks like today. So it could be weird for a couple of you, it may be a little bit uncomfortable, but I want everybody to have an opportunity to share some stories, talk about foliar feeding alfalfa, what we do, why we do it, how we do it, because it's been quite a discussion topic in, what do I want to say, the Facebook group here recently. So first of all, I'm going to say this. I did have a couple slides prepared. And now that I'm sitting on the side of the road and one computer versus at my desk, I am going to just rely on everybody to help me with this conversation. First slide I intended to show was a slide that showed soil pH and nutrient availabilities at different pH levels. And what I wanted to start this thing out with is just saying this, that soil pH can dictate and or allow or not allow us to get nutrients from the soil. That's no secret to most of us. We all kind of know how that works. But when you have these negatively charged particles and positively charged particles out there, I feel a lot of times we have some soil pH that's out of balance, and you might have some soil tests done that tell you that your bank in the soil looks pretty good. But if those things are tied up due to your pH being a little out of whack, now we're trying to aggressively grow a plant and it can't fully extract what's available in that soil profile. So that's the first thing I want you all to realize, is that that happens out there. Most of you know that, but how do we help combat that? And I think foliar feeding gives us an opportunity to, put the nutrients on the leaf where it can absorb it versus trying to pull it from a soil that might have a pH that's out of whack, and we put nutrients out there and it gets tied up. So I'm going to open this up. Is there anybody that wants to give us an example of how maybe they have done that? They've taken some soil samples, got the pH back, maybe even a tissue sample, went and treated that field, and what were some of the results? And then what spurred this whole conversation, as a gentleman said, are there any university trials or data out there that can convince me that foliar feeding is worth it? Okay, so anybody want to throw any personal testimonial out there of how foliar feeding alfalfa with micros and or other nutrients has helped or benefited? I'm going to leave it. I'm going to let you throw your input in here. I want to hear from people. It doesn't need to just be a Jeff Jackson show today. Anybody want to volunteer? Kyle Kegel, you're sitting right there. I can see your face. You're on. I know you're a grower. You're in the crowd. I know you've done micronutrients. How do you feel about that action?
Yeah, can you hear me all right, Jeff?
Absolutely can.
Well, basically what I've been doing is I've been incorporating micronutrient packaging with fungicide and insecticide applications, mainly toward right before first cutting. You're making the pass for weevils. I'll put the micronutrients in there with the insecticide and the fungicide. Also, throughout the year, now remember, you have to start out with a normal dry fertilizer program to complement this micronutrient process. But basically what I do is I soil sample, I have grid sampled, and I VRT all my dry fertilizer. Boron is a very important micronutrient in alfalfa production. And what I normally do is after each cutting, when the hay gets about 6 inches tall, regrowth, I'll go out there. And if we need insecticide, I'll throw in some boron, 728-4 foliar fertilizer with fully loaded micronutrient package and kelp, humic acid, stuff like that.
So you put a lot of stuff forward into your program, but what kind of, if you had to guess, just from the micronutrient piece, I guess that's the full foliar. Go ahead. What do you think some of the yield difference or result would be based on treatment versus non-treatment? You threw the kitchen sink at it, but what are you paying for your treatment? That's what this is all.
Oh, definitely. We're seeing a ton increase, and also adding 50 points to our RFV with some different materials.
Okay. I've got one more person. I can see you on my screen, and I know you do some of it. Kelsey, would you like to share a little bit of your program, if you wouldn't mind, or testimonial on foliar feeding? I guess my point to this, folks, is I believe in foliar feeding alfalfa. I've seen it work. I do it on my own farm. I recommend it on a lot of acres, and we've got people that are successful with it. So, Kelsey, if you wouldn't mind, let's share a little bit about what you've been doing.
A lot of the consistent um, package kind of deal that we've been doing across a lot of acres that I have actual test results on would be the general, like the green up pass. I think, Kyle, that you're kind of referring to as your kind of the basic start plan. I'll just reiterate what Kyle was saying. You got to start with the main fertility. You got to get the good soil samples. Your fertility has to be in check and keep up on that. I've done some split application with splitting the sulfur with elemental and Tiger 90, as well as AMS. I don't have a conclusion on that yet as far as which way I think is better. I still think I'm an AMS 100% person on the dry side of things. Boron is huge. We put boron with every application, dry boron, and then what Jeff is referring to is that green up application. So a lot of the guys here would like to do across the field by ground versus air, but I don't see a huge difference in that application aspect. I would rather have it done by air if it means that your only other option is driving over very brittle crowns, because that green up pass here, at least in the Minnesota, North Dakota area, it's usually going to be fairly cold and kind of half froze on the ground yet when our alfalfa is in that green up stage of like that 4 to 5 inch regrowth. And so again, if guys miss that pass, then we go after the first cutting. And what we do is that 4 ounces of Preaxor or Everlon is the Winfield version of it that came out, I think, 2 years ago. And then I go the 5 ounces of the Ascend SL. There is different versions of SL or of Ascend, but I go the SL version. And because of the proper ratio of the three ingredients that are in it, the need for the alfalfa to have that perfect ratio, I still go the SL. And then we had always been doing ZMB and then mixing in the added boron. Like what Kyle was saying, the boron's huge with alfalfa. And with all the tissue testing that I'd done for I don't know how many years and still do, we know that it's needed. So we do 2 quarts of the ZMB plus, and then it's up to the guys, whatever they'd like to do, if they add the 2 ounces of interlock or if they use master lock. Earlier, I like to use the interlock. And then if it's done with a plane, we use master lock a lot. And that application typically, I just ran the numbers before I got on today. It is about $35 an acre to run that scenario. In 2024, you guys all know it's very hard, especially if you're doing haylage, to get actual weights and results back. And what I did was there was a section that we did a split on, and the grower did his normal Preaxor with his own drift aid of a different brand, and I'm not going to say the brand, but they did their normal package that they had typically been doing, because Preaxor we knew was already doing 0.75 roughly ton more than not doing it at all at green up, mainly because it was retaining that lower leaf loss in that first cutting. And that I do have data on, weighted data side by side with a chopper. And so that was our general protocol. The other half, we ended up doing this protocol. And then I just went out with my hedge trimmer and I measured out an area, and then obviously calculated it to what an acre would be. I took the wet weight and then I sent it off to Dairyland, which is where this entity or this system sends all their samples off to. And the result on that recipe was 1.52 ton higher and 43.3 increase of RFQ. And I had another field that same year we did that on, and that one was on drip. It was a year. See, that was second year stand. This other section that I just gave you the results on, that was a third year stand, second year of severe drought in West Central Minnesota. This other L-shaped field, we came back and I'm like, hey, this is on drip. This looks phenomenal. We've managed the insect issue. And the grower and I, we talked, we're like, let's see what this thing can do. Cause this is this is looking like it's gonna tip over 8. And I think it would have, had we been able to allow it to go the full timing for the last cutting, but they needed to get it cut, get everything switched over to do silage. And that other field that we came back and did literally the same recipe, except for instead of 5 ounces of Sen, we did four. And instead of 2 quarts of Z&B plus, we did 1 quart. Otherwise, it was the 4 ounces of Praxer and the 2 ounces of Interlock. And that field was 7.8 ton final results. And so, you know, in a super drought year, yes, I know it's on drip, but you're talking uh, that other section that we had third year was 6.2 ton was that end final. And then that one that had the drip was just about to 8. And consistently doing these programs with, like Kyle said, making sure your fertility is in check. And these guys are excellent. I mean, as all you guys, that's why you're on this thing, is because you want to do better every time you're out there. That's what these guys are doing. And always trying to push whatever they can out of it, but keep the quality and do a good job on the cut so that they're not doing any damage. So that's the best, like, actual true results that I can get in a haylage situation. I've got some, the bale stuff is always like, well, the bales are X amount of, and I get how many off, and that can be that can vary a lot. But this was actual real weighted results.
So now, when we hear those results, even myself being involved in the system and knowing what can happen, you kind of go, holy smokes, over a ton. Kyle, I know we've talked about this before. I've measured a ton difference. 1 ton of dry matter, actually, even in one cutting, right? Different treated versus untreated. Good soil, great varieties, good base fertility program. So there's a lot of pieces that line up. I would say most generally when I see yield differences, we are talking 0.3 of a ton to a half a ton difference, depending on what your market is, where you're at, quality parameters, all that stuff. We've been paying for our investment and doubling down quite frequently. So just to think about some of that as well, folks. For me, one of the things, so both of you've talked about earlier in the spring at Green Up and how you utilize those treatments at that point. I really, really love that timing for multiple reasons. And I was on a call with some really smart people yesterday talking fertility. And we talked about waking it up or at Green Up. One thing I want everybody to consider when you start thinking about that is in the spring when it tries to green up and we're trying to get things going, how cold is the soil underneath? First cutting, breaking dormancy. And you alluded to that. There's a lot of times you're going out there to try to get it going and it's still pretty cold underneath. So how mobile are nutrients? And anybody can help answer this. I'm watching heads shake in the screen too. How mobile are the nutrients in the spring when it's that cold? And as you said, there might even be frost in the ground in some spots. Nutrients aren't mobile when it's cold and moist, folks. And we're asking that plant, it's trying, it's waking up. It got a little sunlight on that crown and it said, holy smokes, the sun's going to shine. Let's go grow. And if the micronutrients and some of the macros are fairly immobile in the soil, my favorite time to do foliar feeding is when those leaves are starting to show up again. I'm the Mountain Dew guy that says take your Mountain Dew can, set it out in the edge of the field. Some of you might have a Busch Light or a heavy Budweiser, whatever it might be. When it gets that tall, it's time to make an application, and I love micronutrients at that point. And whatever macro that you might be able to get in is beneficial because we're asking that plant to grow aggressively and the soil's too cold to let those nutrients that are down there get going. So micros to me helps me trick that plant or feeding it foliar to give it that zip to get going right away out of the box. And anybody else have any thoughts or comments on that? So that's my primary focus is first cutting. If guys give me a budget and say, hey, these are the dollars I want to spend on alfalfa this year, I'm probably going to the poker table and putting all my chips on first cutting because that's usually when I have the most consistent moisture in a dryland situation. If you're an irrigated situation and you can keep water to that plant and get more yield potential out of it the rest of the year, then I think we baby that thing from cutting to cutting. And some tissue samples will help you gauge what that plant's getting from the soil. And also recognizing the fact that when it's super, super dry, there's just a lot of things that aren't going to work anyway because that plant doesn't have enough moisture to get going. So I'm going to stop. Anybody else on here? There's 55 people on here right now. Anybody want to talk about a testimonial, a do or a don't, things that you've done that worked really good?
I've got some fields I can irrigate with dairy lagoon water, and that's kind of been my foliar or whatever. I don't apply anything to those fields other than sulfur in Idaho. So I'm in Idaho, so I got high pH soils. So if everybody else from other places. And the fields off the dairies have always yielded less. And so, like, I'm putting lagoon water out. We can start March 15. So I've got 2 to 3 inch tall alfalfa, which is about when you're saying applying foliar. But then how can you use a foliar application on the fields farther away where I don't have that luxury to mimic the same sort of effect, I guess? Because right at that 3 to 4 inches tall is typically when we're also doing Roundup, we're doing our fungicide, we're doing our insecticides, and they can all go on in one pass. That's my question.
Okay, now this is going to be brand specific because I do work for a production company that supplies that. And what we've been doing a lot of, and I'm going to rely on some of you crop protection guys to help here a little bit too, but we've been doing a lot of this product that we call Maxin ZMB. So we get zinc, manganese, boron. There's a new version of ZMB Plus right now that's got an extra little tweak of boron in it with some other nutrients as well. And if anybody wants to give him the true text sheet on that, go for it.
Hey, it doesn't have an extra tweak of boron. It's
Doesn't.
got 21 times as much boron, Jeff.
But yeah, not just a little tweak. It's 21 times as much boron. So thank you for
So,
that, John.
so I think perfect for alfalfa. That's why I bring that up. I mean, because that's really that's a big one we're after is the boron piece, and that really fits nice with that alfalfa acre.
And the nice thing about it too is you have your Maxin technology piece with the high fructose corn syrup to get it to absorb more effectively in that plant as well. Correct?
Right on, buddy.
I mean, that's been one of our big talking points is we can effectively get more boron into the plant because of that system instead of just throwing another liquid type boron or the dry boron out there. And when you start talking high pHs, that was one of my first success stories. Was one of those dairies in the Midwest that had a pH of 8.7, 8.9 on a couple of fields. And I'm like, well, goodness sakes, the micros and half the macros are going to be tied up in the soil. Let's bump that thing. So we did. That was one of those first big stories where we did, a quart of the ZMB and an extra pint of boron, hit it with a little insecticide. And literally, when I called the dairy to ask about what the yield results were, they put me off for a couple of weeks because they said there was a discrepancy in the scale tickets. They couldn't believe that there was that much difference in the 60 acres that was treated versus the 60 acres non-treated. And then I called back again in a couple of weeks and they said, well, yeah, it was like 1.01 tons difference in dry matter. And I said, well, on 60 acres, if you messed up 2 truckloads, it's not going to change it that much. So I'll take that all day long. Now, do we see a ton of dry matter? I don't know that I've seen that again. But in that example, on that year, on that field, just by foliar feeding on the first cutting, and again, 8.9, that half the stuff out there was tied up in the soil. So I think that was one of our big key pieces. And I've been all over on that thing, and then I've went out and done third cutting alfalfa where it didn't rain at all and you get zero effect. Moisture is still a key factor. We have to have the moisture to grow the plant and make that foliar application effective. Anybody else on
From the ZMB product, which I've
yeah,
used off and on, how much phosphorus can you foliar feed and be effective?
John, did we talk about that yesterday too? I think the macros are pretty hard to get into a plant foliar.
You made me talk more about potassium than phosphorus.
I know we did.
So
It was
we didn't cover a lot of phos, but typically, like on a dairy situation, phosphorus really isn't the problem just because there's an overabundance of phosphorus already, with the manure. So we're always after the potash. And I think, Jeff, that's kind of why we got stuck on the potash.
The
you're in a
problem is
remote.
all my cows are in Idaho and I'm low on phosphorus in Nevada. That's why I'm asking the
Right.
question.
So if you want to foliar feed phosphorus, there's really not a great way to do a foliar feed phosphorus and really to get it in through the leaf tissue at the quantity that you need for a macronutrient is super difficult to get that in there. So you got to do a soil type of application. Now, I do work with products that do have some, like we got a gainer high phos that I've worked with We do have some other products that you can get phosphorus load in there. But I mean, a lot of times we're putting on, it might be a 45% phosphorus product, but you're getting, 5 to 10 pounds. And you do the math on that, and you're only getting a few pounds of phosphorus when in reality you're pulling tons of alfalfa off. You're going to need a whole bunch more to suffice there. So I don't know if there's a good way to foliar apply phosphorus if you truly are deficient there. I think that's where we talked about, like with Kelsey mentioned, is the green up piece. We got to figure out how to get that base fertility there. And that's probably going to be a dry fertilizer application. You can always touch it up with a foliar phos or a foliar potassium, but you got to get that pounds to the ground, that dry out there to get a good start with it.
Eric, is that dry land and is it high pH soil where you're wanting to do that, or what is that?
Pivot irrigated, we run about 8 pH soil and 8 pH irrigation water, which is not awesome, but it does work. We don't have any cattle next to that, and that's why I'm asking how to give it just that little extra kick. We have done a lot of remediation, we've made progress, but it takes a long time to fix up soil fertility, especially in high desert.
What pH are you at there? Like an 8.5?
No, right at like an 8, right
At
at
an
8,
8? Okay.
8.0.
Okay. And the soil type is what?
It's just a white desert loamy soil, really high in calcium.
It is high in calcium.
Yes.
Um,
It's all the sulfur.
can you inject for fertigation through the pivot?
Yes.
Have you ever done anything like a 31818 or a melted potash?
No, we tried some sulfur. We thought about doing phos acid. We cleaned up all the compost we could find within 60 miles, and I'm trying to figure out how to economically haul it 200 miles, but that's been our best luck. We applied dry phosphorus treated with magnet. I actually really like that approach, like I protect the phosphorus a little bit so it doesn't immediately tie up. I think in that scenario on that farm, you buy the old guy's farm that hasn't bought fertilizer in 40 years. It's just like literally hasn't bought fertilizer in 40 years. It just takes a long time. Jeff is laughing. He's like, yeah, no fertilizer for 40 years. It's bad.
I know some of our growers, we've done foliar phosphorus, and it's worked well in those high pH areas.
And my question about foliar phosphorus is when you spray weeds down there, you're still hitting 25 on a regular basis. So you'll get a week of really warm, and then it'll just get cold, and you have cold dirt like Jeff was talking about. Is that enough kick to add another boost to your first cutting? Because then by the time you get to second cutting, it's overnight lows are 70 degrees. It's 110 the daytime, and it's just going to grow as fast as you can put water. So
there's if you put I don't know if you mind putting your email in the link or sending it to Jeff and he can send it to me, but there's an article on some data that they did on 31818 foliar. And and I just thought you have an irrigator, so I just thought that'd be a better option because the 31818 isn't ortho, and you can make sure it's 100% ortho versus like an 80-20 ortho poly, because the ortho, I mean, we deal with 8-7 pH here. And so, not necessarily so much for alfalfa because that's not ideal, but for other crops that we're fertigating, we're trying to get that fertility, same exact reason. It's like a 4 parts per million of phos, and we're trying to build that. And yes, most of the time we're doing a dry application or an in-furrow with a relay or something like that. But I can send you that article of I think it was 31818 and 624-6 that was compared. I would say 31818 is a better option because you have a higher potassium content in there. And then also melted potash, it's like a white potash. You could actually spread it on and then water it in, or you could just get the melted version. It's just kind of a pain to deal with because they have to melt it and you have to use it within a month. And you may have to keep circulation or agitation on your tender tank on the pivot. Usually we get cold here too, and usually we're doing it the middle of summer, but sometimes you never know. But if you're doing it within a month and getting it applied, you shouldn't have a separation or a settling out issue. If you do, you just have to recirculate it again.
It's a good question.
I do have your dairy, like where you do have the dairy, is it separated liquid and the solids? pretty heavily, or is it like through a digester, or is it just basic, good old OG dairy manure?
We run through just settling ponds. We don't have any fancy separation. We're working on that, but no digester, nothing. So the ratios are still all still in check. That's one of the things we found with some of the dairies is once you start using like centrifuges and some of that sort of stuff, your NPK ratios are whack. And that it doesn't, your fertility becomes out of whack pretty quick. And you can actually get really salty because the potassium is what stays in the water, and you can remove nitrogen and phosphorus pretty easy. So on that water, it's just manure water. We typically blend it, so we're not, we'll sample it and then blend it. And it's not a perfect blend. It's kind of a cowboy blend, but it gets us kind of what we want. And we have a plus or minus 50 application rate, and we just kind of check soil tests, and that's kind of how we do it with the alfalfa and the corn. And then if we're applying anything else, we have a full compost operation on 6 different facilities. So that's a rather intensive process that we're shooting for as high a nutrient content as possible and actually sell a lot of that. I'm here local in Idaho, but that's just a manure derived compost with a lot of bedded pack straw material in it. And that typically comes out like a 20-20-50 NPK plus all the micros, and it's typically very high in calcium. So that's what I'm applying. Idaho is a similar type of soil, and so it gets compost and a lot of sulfur for pH remediation. And that's kind of the entire thing. The ZMB product I've used off and on in the past, and I know it's the ZMB sales call, right? Kind of, but that's one of the luxury items on my budget, but it is a decent product. So
Yeah. Yeah, not necessarily meant to be a sales call, but there's a lot of us on here that use the same thing, so it kind of feels like it at times.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, Randy, please,
This is
man.
Randy. Yeah, I'll jump in here and want to go back to something Kelsey said in her first comments. There is that whole testing thing, and we offer the NutriSolutions test, which is a great way to basically quantify what nutrients you need and how much. So I always cringe a little bit at conversations that just we're going to go out and sell some micronutrients without knowing what we're selling, right, or why we're selling it. But that NutriSolutions test is an example. You can zero in on boron. I need to have 40 parts per million in alfalfa for boron, and that's the number I need to hit no matter where I am in the U.S. That's the number you need to hit. And so if you are getting into the mid-season and the soil starts to dry off, and maybe this is a little more an upper Midwest comment, but when the soils get dry, that boron pulls onto those soil particles and becomes less and less available. And that's when you need to give that alfalfa a drink of boron along with leafhopper spray, or when you're going in there with any other application. So it works really well. So I always suggest to my sellers that I've worked with, I said, if that tank is going out there and it's going out there with just one product in it, that's kind of a seller mistake, right? So you need to make sure you're thinking about, if it's going with insecticide, it always gets a max in boron treatment. Back on the ZMB comment that was just made, alfalfa does not have a huge requirement for zinc, really. And so if you look at the zinc numbers on tissue tests, that's pretty low requirement. So just be aware of that we really need sulfur and we need boron. And tissue tests are really good at giving us numbers on sulfur and boron. It's hard to get enough sulfur in through that plant tissue. You need to get it in on soil, either as ammonium sulfate or gypsum or even elemental sulfur. But you've got to get more sulfur. I think we did some work here in the upper Midwest and Midwest Forage Association where we found about half the farms were still deficient in sulfur. So it's a big need out there that we need to really talk to growers about their secondaries and micros to improve alfalfa yields. So just make sure you're checking those. And you don't have to do tissue tests on every field every year, but you need to have some idea where you're at. And when I start with a farm and a new seller, it's like you just have to get out there and get those tissue tests. And they're a little bit of a pain. Yeah, you got to go out and take them, and you got to walk some fairly. I like to take them on first cutting alfalfas. When I like to take tissue tests, I ran a crop scouting service in Wisconsin for a lot of years when I was right out of college, and we like to take those tissue tests right after on first crop growth about a week before cutting. And that gives you a chance to get your corrective applications on in second cutting, which works really, really well. The other quick comment on tissue tests is that calcium will nearly always be low on a tissue test. And that's because calcium is very immobile in the alfalfa plant. It stays in the bottom third of the plant, half of the plant. And for tissue tests, we only take the top half of their third of the plant. So you get the mobile nutrients, but you don't get these immobiles like calcium. So I I tend to discredit calcium on a tissue test when I see a fairly low calcium test. But just some words of coaching on tissue testing. And Kelsey, thanks for initiating that discussion because that is really important as agronomists. So we spend time not just being, my general statement is we need to be agronomists first and salespeople second. And to support your sales role, you need to have that tissue test to verify the need for the micronutrient. So I don't know, John, if I triggered any thoughts around NutraSolutions, if you want to jump in and mention your the fairly new test we have. So I don't know if that's something you
Yeah,
can
no,
mention.
Randy, thanks for the NutraSolutions piece. I think you brought up a bunch about sulfur, and I guess when I think about NutraSolutions, I think about all the samples we've taken over the years. A lot of folks on this call probably taken a lot of those samples, but you mentioned the sulfur piece, and when I think NutraSolutions, I was thinking, well, what does the nutrient actually do? So, like for sulfur, the reason that's so important is because that's one of the backbones to making protein, and if we're thinking about alfalfa, that's really truly what we're after is how do we get that plant to be as efficient as we can in making protein, and sulfur is a big piece of that. And then you did mention zinc isn't as important, and that's so true because zinc is more important in crop like a corn crop where we actually have to mobilize and move a bunch more nutrients because we got a bigger plant that's taller, that's bringing in a higher quantity of nutrients, that sort of thing at a given time. You're absolutely right. Zinc isn't truly that important, but you think about manganese and boron. I mean, manganese is super important for alfalfa. I think that's one of the overlooked ones is because it helps with photosynthesis. So the better we can photosynthesize an alfalfa, because we're cutting it 3, 4, maybe 5 times a season, the healthier crown we have, the bigger crop we can get during the season. So that's always a big one. And of course, I mean, everybody on this call should probably know some reasons to be thinking about boron, especially with alfalfa, but that's moving the sugars and the photosynthates around in the plant, particularly up and around through those trifoliates. So anything that is being photosynthesized in the trifoliate has got to move back through the petiole and down the shoot to feed the roots, to feed the stalk, to feed all the growing points. And that's really what boron's helping do. So Randy, when you mentioned NutriSolutions, I think about all the things we learned to try to figure out which nutrients are key and at what timings, because we can all say, well, we're just going to put a nutrient package out there. Well, who cares about a nutrient package? Like, let's get the right nutrient to get the response we're looking for. I think that's what we try to get after as agronomists first is choose the right nutrient to get the response on your acres.
Yeah, and I think I want to reemphasize the fact too that folks, if you're out there and you've done some soil testing or you have a tissue test and it has a boron deficiency, and it goes back to the mobilization of boron in the soil as well. And there are a lot of people that didn't pay a lot of attention to boron for a very long time. And I get the common question of, well, if I spray my first cutting with boron, will that fix me for the whole year? A foliar application of boron is usually only good for that cutting that you're taking at that point. So it's not a boron solution. It's basically a band-aid from one cutting to the next. And I want to remind people that the boron thing, if you're in that trap where you don't have enough available in the soil and maybe it's immobile for one reason or another, the boron application has to be monitored and applied more than once. It's just basically a bridge. So if anybody wants to expand upon that or go, you can. But anybody else? Okay, so there's been Eric, you chimed in here. We had a bunch of Winfield people. Anybody outside the Winfield system have anything they want to talk about? I don't want that to deter anybody from joining the call in the future. So give us some input if you're kind of
Hey,
outside
Jeff,
what
this
I
is
do every
Kurt.
day. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to address Eric's this farm you have in Nevada. I want to share I've worked in Montana and Wyoming where the high pHs, we have high
Right.
native potassium levels. I ran into a guy, he's one of my largest alfalfa customers. Met him about 10 years ago. They run a big alfalfa cubing facility. And he said, we can't raise over 5-ton alfalfa anymore. The farm's been predominantly alfalfa for 60 plus years, feeding this cubing machine. And I said, "Do you have any soil tests?" And he said, "Yeah." And he gave me soil tests from 5 different fields. 4 of them, their phosphate level was 2 to 7 parts per million, and the fifth one was 18 parts per million. I told him the one with 18 parts per million yields more than the other ones. And he says, "How did you know that?" And it was pretty simple agronomics there. But I want to make sure I don't think anybody's really addressed your base phosphate level. And you told us that the guy that had it before hadn't bought a pound of fertilizer in 40 years. So I just wondering what your base phosphate level is on your soil test?
The lowest was
Is
a
it
3 and
single? Is it
highest
2,
was
3,
a
6, 8
7.
million, or is it
I
that's
I
7?
actually
That's probably holding your.
yes.
Go
So
ahead.
that's why we applied just regular with the magnet first year. I figured out real quick. I would really rather have cow poop. So we went down to Nevada and started helping people start composting since we do that. My bad spots are now 20 parts per million, Jeffrey. The
Okay,
good
good.
spots, so here's a question I have related to that. We have one field that is just an ne'er do well. It does not want to do anything, but it's super wavy. You've got a new package on the pivot, and spot checking soil samples were a 20 to a 60 just on phosphorus, like moving over 10 feet. And I don't know if that's spreader. It looks like it's more just random weird spots in the field. And we got everything up to teens to 20s. A few of the better spots are getting into the 30s finally. So the plan is to continue to apply compost if I could find it, because it comes with all your micros and all that stuff, and then just apply sulfur. We got real cowboy and decided to eject sulfur in the pivots, and so we built a few new manifolds, as you can imagine. But it worked really well as far as a crop response, because all of the weird yellow striping discolorations in the really high, like super cliquey parts of different fields, all that went away. Hay test or hay quality, we started hitting 23s on protein in Nevada, which nobody told me that was possible. So we probably wrecked our irrigation, but it was the right product for that field. So we just need to continue going in that direction. But yes, about the farm, water tables at 30 feet, cheapest irrigation I have on any farm ever, anywhere, but definitely it's short on nutrients. End of story. We'll see if we crash any pivots this year, I guess.
Was this conversation useful for anybody that was on here today? Post yes or no in the comments section in the chat box or whatever. I'd like to gauge whether we continue to do some of these kind of things. Yes, no, indifferent. Okay, good. There's got to be more fertility comments or questions out there, or foliar feeding. I'd like to have another session another day and just discuss what we see on fungicide use and activities. I think I want to schedule another one down the road, maybe to talk more about the base macronutrients and managing some of those pieces. So we'll kind of scatter these topics and subjects out, but I think over the next, we'll just continue to schedule maybe once a month and do a big Zoom call and get everybody on. There's just so much out there. Thoughts or comments from anybody? Otherwise, we're going to close this baby down.
Jeff,
Yeah.
you come back with any soil samples on adding these micronutrients for over the years? Has your soil samples changed at all? You were looking into that here a year or so ago. That
I would say that from using the foliar micronutrients, I did not get followed up on that project. But I would say that if we're applying foliar, we're probably not getting much in the soil to any degree to build that level. And if that shallow feeder root system is got some moisture with it right away, if we overshoot that plant and get some on the ground, we're probably using them up pretty quick. Because we're generally short on these micros out there anyway. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments, feeling on that? I really don't think we're going to build much of a nutrient profile off of foliar applied micros. Thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, this is
Yeah.
Lyndon.
Hey, Lyndon.
I agree with you on that. You need to have your levels in the ground
Yep.
adequate. You cannot build your soil with foliar.
No, absolutely.
But I will say, in my experience, you can maintain your levels with foliar if done correctly and using the right product.
Sure.
Back to the sulfur issue, I only apply my sulfur through foliar, and my levels in the plant were sufficient to high. So I'm getting enough sulfur in my plant without any ground application, in my experience. And boron, I don't need to tell everybody this, they know this anyway, but boron and sulfur, you got to put that on every year no matter what. You can't build them levels up in your soil. They leach out. So in my experience, I took tissue samples twice this year on every alfalfa field I had. And I foliar fed every cutting after every cutting. And my levels were sufficient to high across the board. All the like calcium, boron, potassium, phosphorus. Like I say, all foliar fertilizers are not created equal. So I'm not trying to sell any different. I'm not trying to sell the brand I'm using. I'm just saying It's
Right.
important to have a high quality product that you're using that doesn't have a lot of impurities and byproducts in the fertilizer.
Right
And
on. Very good.
I wanted to say something else. I really appreciate you having this Zoom call. Everybody learns. Everybody can learn off of another grower's experience. I really appreciate what you're doing. Thanks a
Well,
lot.
that was part of the reason I figured I'd open it up to a very large group of people with different levels of experience, different types of operations, because I'm sure on here we have people that are thousands of acres of alfalfa down to people that are raising 10 or 15. So alfalfa is still a hungry plant, needs to be fed. And I know there's a lot of need for this knowledge out there. So that's why we're doing this today. So I appreciate it. Even for our team, we talk about alfalfa all the time, but we very rarely have these type of calls where we just let people ask questions, talk about their experiences, give some examples, get people thinking differently. I think that's a big reason I like to do this is none of us have the answer of all answers every time. But if you can stimulate that thought process and get to ask some questions, and if everybody improves a little percentage every once in a while, it's just a win. There
One
was a
thing I would like
comment.
to add on there, otherwise,
Yeah.
when guys are foliar feeding, if you can up your PSI, that actually helps get a lot easier into the plant too. Like, so if you're 65 to like 80 PSI, instead of your standard 40 to 20, that'll help drive it into the plant. Then use some fulvic acids too.
Tell me about why fulvic acid is important on that application.
Well, fulvic acid, every time we've done side by sides with and without fulvic, we've had higher tissue levels in the plant.
Very good. And do you know the mechanism that's driving that in? I'm asking the question because I don't know fulvic acids at all.
The nitty gritty stuff, no. We just know it works every time we add a liquid. We throw fulvic with it.
So your point today is like elementary. It's talking to a kindergartner here. I spent $1 and I got 2 back. Oh, okay, you win. I like that idea. Thank you. Yes.
So on the fulvic acid, is that a sugar product that has fulvic acid in it?
No, this would just be, well, I guess nothing straight fulvic, but it would be like a 6 or 8% fulvic acid product.
I'm using a sugar product that has fulvic acid in it.
Okay.
And I think it's maybe 3% fulvic acid. I'm not sure. I have to look at the label. I don't have that in front of me now, but agree with you. It works great. I get a lot of response from it.
And I've had other people tell me about fulvic acid use, and I have not fully gone down that road on my own acre to see it, touch it, feel it, believe it, talk about it, right? I have a weird process. I got to prove it to myself before I'm even going to tell you, Brandon, that you should be doing it. I have not done it yet, but it's
Highly
good to hear that
recommended.
that people are finding good successes with it. And if anybody on here has the plant physiology mechanism of why that helps or what it does, I'm all ears too. I've got time. Do we have a fulvic acid expert on here?
I know how it works in hemp if you'd like to know that.
In hemp, is it very similar?
Yes, the fulvic and the humic acid, and then also we use humic acid and sugar beets to help fungicides penetrate the leaf cuticle a little bit better. And I have to look at the data, but I think it's something about neutralizing I don't know what it is, but something about with the stomata and the acceptance and the entrance of the fungicide, and that might have to be another call to another guru that I don't remember the fine details of it.
Yeah. Let's do that. We should have a call someday just on humic and fulvic acids because I get talked to about those a lot, and people that have had some fantastic success in alfalfa and other legume crops. Maybe we'll have to dig on that a little bit. Good set of conversations. There was some comments in here about let's see, let me open my chat box again. What was the comments about calcium? Anybody want to take a stab at those?
So we use a liquid
Where was that at?
product called Liberate CA for calcium that's readily available. I know it's in there. A lot of liquid calciums in the market do not play well, like with phosphorus, for example, and this is one liquid calcium that we found that works really well. That isn't going to turn your tank to cottage cheese if you'd mix it with like a different calcium with a phosphorus product.
Yeah. So I know we have some guys on our team that have done so we have a Max In calcium product, of course. That's our staple brand, but there's some guys I think in Wisconsin have had very good luck with our calcium product in tank mixes too on foliar fed material. So we'll have to check on that a little bit more. I know that we have some data, some side-by-side field trials. Okay, y'all have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining me on a fabulous foliar feed forage Friday. How about that for a tongue twister today? Have a good day. Well, I'll catch up with you again another time. Watch for some more invites in the next month, and we'll do it again. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jeff.